The business landscape is ever evolving, so how can your business develop environmentally friendly and sustainable practices? Learn all about sustainability strategies in my masterclass in the Absa Women in Business series.
Okay, so welcome everybody to yet another exciting masterclass. In case you've missed the previous sessions that we've had, you'll be happy to know that we have all the recordings on our YouTube channel. So please go on to YouTube, search for Absa Bank Zambia, and you'll be able to find previous masterclasses that we're talking about HR management, financial management, business, financial planning, and investing. But I think today is yet another big one for us, and so we'll focus on that. Today we're privileged to have with us Ms. Sarah Lloyd. Welcome, Sarah, to today's masterclass. Thank you. She's an experienced Chief Risk Officer. So when you hear me say CRO, in case I forget, that means Chief Risk Officer. She's got extensive regulatory and economic experience. She's held the role in Zambia since 2022, but previously she was holding a similar role in Absa Seychelles. Sarah has worked at the Central Bank of Seychelles for 12 years, where she undertook various roles, including Senior Financial Stability Analyst, Economist, Communications Officer. But I think also important to note, she is the only female Chief Risk Officer across the Absa group. That's in 10 countries. So kudos to you, Sarah, for that. Thank you. Sarah holds a Master of Science in Financial and Economics from the City University in London, and a Bachelor of Science Joint Honours in International Banking and Finance from Bayes Business School. I hope I pronounced that correct.
Yes, you did.
Okay. Sarah is also certified in sustainable finance, hence us having her here today. FinTech, as well as financial programming and policy by various institutions such as Cambridge Institute of Sustainable Learning, IMD, and Northwestern University. But I think critical to today's conversation is Sarah's actually the founder and chair of the Absa Regional Operations Women in Risk forum. I suppose that it would be a forum. She's the founder of ELS, that is ELS Foundation, that is focused on teenage pregnancy. She's also a member of Interact, and I found this really, really interesting. She holds the position of secretary, or used to hold the position of secretary, treasurer, and president, and she was awarded for various initiatives such as raising funding for building wells in Somalia and supporting orphanages in Madagascar. So, I mean, for me, that is a lot. Obviously, you look extremely young with such a big CV, if I can call it that. But yeah, I think, Sarah, for us today, we thought, let's talk about sustainability and try to get a little bit more into the detail around that. Many a time, ESG and sustainability are words that we hear and often used interchangeably. And I'm not so sure how many of us actually know where one starts, where does ESG start, where does sustainability end? And maybe within our day-to-day lives, we could actually be doing things that are linked to sustainability. So maybe you could give us an overview on what are those things that we could be blind to that we are actually doing right on a day-to-day basis. And I think interesting for me, I would like to know where the passion for sustainability comes from. So maybe before we get into the presentation, let's just touch on those two.
Perfect. Thank you, Banji. So maybe I'll start with the first bit about ESG versus sustainability. I find the easiest way to explain it, and you're right, they are often used interchangeably, and for most conversations can be used interchangeably. Okay. But if we're going to get technical and specific about it, then sustainability is probably that big umbrella. Okay. And ESG is then, it's a much more specific, almost technical bit underneath the umbrella. Okay. So ESG is something that generally you're going to say corporates are looking at. Investors will look at it from an ESG perspective because then there are technical metrics that they'd use to measure and monitor it, whereas sustainability is, it's that big umbrella. It's more high level. It can encompass more. You can put some of your CSR and that corporate social responsibility element under there. Some of those softer things that are harder to quantify and measure the direct impact would also count under sustainability. And I think to your question there of what could we be doing in our daily lives, some of them are really small changes, right? So I've got friends who love gardening, and they make sure that they collect their, the veg and their eggshells, and they crush them down and then put it in the soil in their garden because it helps the plants grow. But that's recycling, you're composting. Okay. So that is still, sustainability. I know we were having a discussion earlier about microbeads and choosing shower gels that don't have microbeads in because microbeads are harmful to the environment. You can make really small changes and choices. And yes, it could be argued that they're not going to change much in the ground. But if everybody took that small little initiative, then surely they would all build up to having a greater, bigger impact. I have a friend who stopped using she doesn't use shower gel, shampoos, whatever. She uses soap baths because, again, they have less packaging, there's less plastic in there, and you can then choose ones which are more sustainably made. So it's really small things that you can choose to do that actually will all build up and have an impact. And obviously then you can go bigger and bolder and say, I want solar rather than fossil fuel power on my house. I will have an electric car as opposed to a diesel vehicle. Those are then bigger decisions that we can take that would factor in.
In the long run. So I think maybe just before you tell us about your passion, so there you have it. Please do not throw away those eggshells. I think many of us would be standing and thinking, oh my God, I actually get rid of them. So we do know that for as long as you're putting it back into the soil, it's got natural nutrients or will then result into natural nutrients. Please, let's just make sure that we're doing our part. But let's talk about passion.
So yes, I think when looking at it, and as you talk about Interact, when I was 13, 14 years old, and when I was on Interact, which is the children's version of Rotary. So probably, again, the term sustainability wasn't being thrown around then. It's not something that I thought of as saying this is something I'm passionate about, but I've always been very passionate about helping others and helping the environment. I think in terms of helping others, it came from a space of recognizing that we are all blessed in different ways, but where I may be blessed in one particular area, then can I not use that to try and help others? The orphanage in Madagascar, I think I was 14 years old and wanted to adopt a child because I was so gutted that I was going to have to leave this baby behind, and I wanted to take him home and look after him for the rest of my life. So it's probably just something that almost has always been there. But from the environmental perspective, I think coming from a country like Seychelles, where you can visibly see the impact of climate change. You can see that the sea levels are rising. You can see, the amount of plastic that's washing up on the beach coming from all around the world. It's very difficult to then not recognize that impact. People have had their gardens reduced by half. We have roads that have been, hit and have to then be built up because of the erosion coming with the way that the tides are changing and the sea levels are changing. Coral reefs that almost all died out because of the rising temperature. So seeing that quite visibly as a teenager and being involved in projects to try and monitor it and then obviously rebuild it, I think is where a lot of the passion has stemmed from, to say we can't continue to not recognize the risk that is here. And if we recognize the risk, we should try and do something to reduce the impact, but equally make the most of the situation we're now in.
Okay, great. So I think, ladies, and I do hope we do have some gents on the call today. If you don't, and there's a gentleman who needs to be part of the conversation, please pull them in. But I think right now we're good to start and get into the presentation, hoping that we can all have a takeaway in terms of what sustainability is. What is our role? So I'll hand to you, Sarah, now to just lead us into this afternoon session.
Thank you. I think, as you said, obviously the session is for women in business, but guarantee you this presentation is open to all. And I think I only once referred to ladies or women. We obviously have sort of touched already on this bit in terms of what is ESG, what's the difference between ESG and sustainability. But one of the key reasons I want us to stop here, and you don't need to come into if you'd like to come into the chat, that would be very much appreciated and welcomed, but you don't have to, is really to take a moment and think, when you hear ESG, what do you think of? What do you think that actually means. If someone says, oh, or this is a sustainable product, what is it that comes to mind? And the reason that I'm bringing this up is because we find more often than not, people think of green things. We think of trees, we think of recycling, we think of waste, we think of erosion, we think of droughts. So very much on the climate side of things, which is the E. And forget that actually there are 3 letters in here, right? You've got your E, your S, and your G. And so I wanted us to just take a moment before we get into how SMEs and businesses and even individuals can really integrate this into their operations, but to take a moment to unpack what these 3 are. The environmental, so E, is exactly as it alludes to, right? This is the environmental impact or environmental benefits. So here you would think waste management, you'd think tree planting, you'd think carbon emissions, be it reducing them or tracking them. You think energy efficiency, air and water pollution, environmental protection, all of those components. Then we come to our S, which often you hear referred to as the forgotten child. Those jokes about how if you have 3 children, the middle one gets forgotten all the time. So the social is seen to be the forgotten middle child, in that we forget that it is part of sustainability, is part of ESG. And this is the first and only time I'm going to speak to specifically the ladies, really, is this is the bit that should speak to all of the women in business, because this social bit is around the diversity and equity. So this is where you would be tracking things like how many women do you have in your institution?
Mm-hmm.
Even as a big corporate, how many women do we have working for us? How many women do we have in management? How many in senior management? This is where you start to capture that. But it's obviously not just women. You don't want it to be entirely skewed either. You want to have diversity, and you want to be able to demonstrate that you've got equity. And that diversity is not just across the genders. You want diversity in age. You'd want diversity in ethnicity, because that diversity brings different benefits. Here also, under social, we look at your human rights, your labor rights. What are the working conditions? Are you treating the people who work for you or with whom you and your business interact fairly, properly, as per the minimum requirements of the law, but also where needed, maybe a bit beyond that, right? Do you have good employee relations? Sorry. Sorry. Do you have good employee relations? Are there any pay gaps between the different elements in your organization? So that's the E and the S. As I said, E is much better known and understood and appreciated by all. The S is then the additional components that some look at and think of. Then we come to the G. So G, I think, often is seen as the contributing factor to it. Oh, I don't know why I'm coughing now. And G is probably the area where, as a CRO, I am most often placed.
Mm-hmm.
So the G is your governance, right? And that speaks to, are you transparent as an entity? And particularly when we're looking at ESG, is then also going to be related to things like greenwashing. There's no point saying that you're green and that you're sustainable if you're not really. So are you transparent? Are you transparent in your operations? Do your shareholders have the correct rights? Do you have a board of directors that is independent? And obviously a lot of these will relate more to your more established or larger corporates than to SMEs. But I think it's important to still be conscious of these, because even as a startup, you have a goal and ambition as to where you want to be. And so this should be part of that longer term plan, that you want to achieve this level of governance. But even as a startup or, a smaller SME, you may have been in operation for a while, regulatory adherence is incredibly important. Are you compensating your executives properly and fairly? Are you in line with the law? You don't want to end up being fined or taken to court over any of this. So, as I said, before we dig into what does this mean for SMEs, I do think it's important that we take stock here of what the E, the S, and the G are. And I did include the little quote at the top, which I think speaks to what we were talking about with your first question to me, is every single one of us can do a little. And it would be an incredible mistake for us if we said, well, because all I can do is a little, I will do nothing.
Yep.
So if we each do our little, we will come together as a a big grouping of littles that then become a big impact. And here again, I've just split, goes again to our discussion at the beginning, that split between what is ESG, what is CSR, and what is sustainability. So you can see here, they do intertwine. And there is, this diagram doesn't necessarily show it, but there often can be a bit of an overlap. We want to get super technical. They are three distinct things, but I think between sustainability and ESG, we do find that they're used interchangeably. By and large, everybody's going to understand what you're actually talking about. But having a sense of the fact that ESG then is where you get a lot more technical, and it's where you have frameworks that would allow you to attract investors, to access different financing opportunities. But it requires you also to have the data, which is something we'll touch on as we go through the rest of this presentation. So if we then move to essentially what this class is, right? It's a sustainability masterclass for people in business, right? For SMEs in particular. So there is no point in me advocating for you and your business to do something that doesn't make business sense. So I think that is the first imperative I really want to stress here, is that sustainability needs to make business sense. Otherwise the case won't work. So there needs to be, it has to have a business purpose, be it that it's driving your business growth. It can obviously be, as I've said already, allowing you to access cheaper or alternative financing and funding options. Integrating sustainability can reduce waste, it can save costs, it could reduce transportation times, which obviously should lead to a lower cost, but equally just improves the turnaround time for your delivery to clients and customers. So as we go through this, I really want that to be kept in mind, and I hope stays in your mind. If anything stays with you from this presentation and masterclass, I hope that that's it. That sustainability will only work if it makes business sense, and therefore you have to look at it as something that is embedded and integrated into your business rather than something separate. So we go through here saying, look, you've got that it drives business growth. So you can choose to reinvent your business model, and you therefore build sustainable brands, and that's all you're positioning yourself as. You could use it to deepen relationships with customers and suppliers. And this morning I was using the example of, if you have 2 cups of coffee, they cost exactly the same amount. But one says, well, we source our coffee from a group of women who live in a very rural area, and their only source of financing is the coffee that they grow and then sell to us. The coffee costs the same amount. For a large majority of people, hearing that story and realizing that the choice we're making would have an impact on a community is going to shift our decision, right? Yeah. And then you build a loyalty with that customer as well, because I would then, as a customer, say, well, I definitely want to buy coffee A because I'm contributing something more than just the coffee company. You also can build and you help protect that long-term interest of the business and the environment. Right? We cannot continue to say, we can't say we're going to build a business and I want my business to still be active and profitable in 25 years, but I have no consideration for the communities around me or the environment around me. Where is my business operating in 25 years then? I have to have thought about basically the surroundings around me. They will impact the success of my business as well. It also allows, as we said, you to embark on partnerships, seek different financing opportunities, have a longer term. That longer term thinking is going to also be highly beneficial in terms of your staff, their loyalty, having the feedback from them, obviously being able to engage and continue to empower your employees, as well as just have that. I'm using sustainability here in its other definition, right? But to have that sustainability of your business, the sustainability of your workforce, sustainability of your suppliers and your engagement, that will give you that longer term success. And finally, I think we'll go into this a little bit more, and I give quite a few examples, is sustainability. You can reduce waste, you can save costs. By having a responsible value chain, you can actually bring about very clear, definitive financial benefits. And if trying to be sustainable doesn't give you those obvious, clear financial benefits and that long-term, sometimes it does require you to take a slightly long-term view, but that longer-term benefit that can be clearly quantified, then it doesn't make business sense, and maybe you're not looking at doing it the right way or the way that works for your business. And I here is just to say, obviously it goes into a little bit more detail in terms of what is a strong proposition for business, what is a weak one. But a key takeaway here I would like everyone to see is that sustainability is a buzzword that's come about, and everyone jumps, ESG, sustainability, or green. And fundamentally, if you look at it, and that's why here I've got a quote from Milton Friedman, which has been decades and hundreds of years old, but to say this concept of the fact that we, as a business owner or a shareholder, you should be doing something for the long run interest of the corporation, and that in doing that, for the long run interest of your corporation, it may well be that you need to provide resources to things external to your corporation, such as the community, the government, the environment in which you operate, and that in doing so, you would attract better employees, you'd reduce your wage bill, or even have other benefits. Mm-hmm. That is not a new concept. It just was packaged differently or had a different name. So this really is, yes, it's been exacerbated because of the climate change and climate risk that we've observed, but that concept of long-term business success means that you cannot have your business operate as an island. You have to be cognizant of the environment around you. So then we can move on to, I guess, the crux of the matter for most people on the call.
Exactly, right? Yeah.
I've gone through a coughing spell as well as the business sense and case for sustainability to now saying, all right, so how do you actually do it as an SME? What does it actually mean? And there are some, I really do encourage you to have a look into this, because there are some amazing stories of SMEs globally, regionally, that they've just come up with some incredible things, and I will discuss some of them in this section, but I'm sure there are thousands of others that I haven't heard of, just starting ideas that's still in someone's head, but have a look at them. There are some really, really interesting stories, and it also shows that you don't necessarily have to reinvent the wheel. So you've got your SME, be it a startup, be it not, you're there, you exist as your business. By integrating ESG, I've said this multiple times already, you can access multiple other financing opportunities to those available if you don't. And I do have a list of grants and other things to mention later on, but you do then create additional financing opportunities for yourself. You also can look at energy efficiency and cost reduction, and what business owner doesn't want to reduce their costs. Mm-hmm. You get staff retention and customer loyalty. Both of those, if you think about it, have financial implications and benefits to you. And if you're positioning your business to really then be a sustainable business, as opposed to a business that integrates some ESG into your operations, you then also you're creating niche opportunities and niche customer segments, because you do have customers who are very specific and responsible in their buying decisions. So the pictures here, I think, should also help speak to the different opportunities that there are, right? So the world, you've got globally, regionally, challenges around environmental and social issues, and SMEs are really emerging as the key players in tackling this.
Yeah.
Part of the reason is because SMEs can be more nimble and agile and respond. An SME is going to respond faster than a large corporate beast. The big corporates, we've got layers of decision making, and we are just much slower to move. But SMEs are not, and they're able to actually therefore drive sustainability much faster and adapt and adjust and bring it into their core operations, which is why I think it's so interesting, because for SMEs, then it shows that their size is not a barrier to their success in terms of integrating and implementing it, but is actually then where they have the opportunity. So I'll go through a couple of different examples of SMEs who have been successful in integrating ESG or play specifically in the ESG space. One is a US-based SME called Avocado Green Brands, and they produce eco-friendly mattresses. And so what they've done is they've integrated sustainability into every single facet of their business, so that it really is a commitment. They've gotten their certification, which ensures they are meeting the rigorous standards. They use renewable energy in their production process, but also by doing so, they're actually able to offset the carbon that they do produce in certain other parts of their manufacturing process, but they produce it. They are performing so well now in that space that they actually offset more carbon than they produce, which puts them in a position where, I mean, I don't know if they do, but in theory, it put them in a position where they're able to actually then trade those carbon emissions. And I think it's really interesting to note here, you obviously here in Zambia have the Ministry of Green Economy. There also is the legislation coming through in terms of carbon emission trading. And so that then becomes an additional source of finance because you're able to then trade it and sell off, the fact that you have the emissions to trade. The next one is it's a UK-based company that makes tea. They do tea and supplements. They obviously it's a UK SME, so I guess for us would be considered fairly large. But it is considered in the UK an SME, and they have again decided to seamlessly integrate sustainability into their mission. So they only use 100% organic ingredients. They only buy those ingredients from Fair for Life and Fair Trade certified suppliers, meaning they know that again the conditions that people are working in to produce these ingredients meet the sustainability and ESG standards. These people are being treated fairly, they're being compensated fairly, that they then form part of that value chain. And they've again made sure that at every step they are, from the growing to the harvesting to the manufacturing, that everybody is treated with dignity and respect. The ingredients are organic. And again, I think this is one where showing that those small actions have had a big impact. And it goes back to this is a case, I think, where it's about you found a niche opportunity in customer segment. Tea is tea, right? But because of this component, it's ethical tea, and therefore you actually then market yourself towards a particular customer segment. I think there's a couple of others that maybe I'll just mention by name before I move into the regional ones, because those initiatives I think are really interesting. You've got the Ben & Jerry's franchisees who, yes, Ben & Jerry's itself is not an SME, but the franchises are. So that's how they operate. And those franchises have all undertaken ESG initiatives to partner with local suppliers, reduce waste, and engage deeply in community initiatives so that they all contribute towards the larger Ben & Jerry's sustainability initiatives. There's another company called Allbirds, which is where your shoes help reduce your carbon footprint. And that is because the shoes are sustainable. They're made from natural materials. We have other huge sports brands of late who started making sneakers from recycled ocean waste, right? So we are seeing a trend in this regard. But these are some bigger, some of these are bigger initiatives. Don't know whether you remember Tom's shoes? Yeah. Right. So remember with Tom's, it was that if you bought a pair of Tom's, a child got a pair of shoes. So these things have been around for years.
So maybe for our clients, I think if you recall, Tom's are a little, they're like, we call them canvas here, like the canvas, and they usually have their label Tom's, and they're in some of our stores, local stores. So I think for me that's exciting that we actually do have brands in country that are in the in the sustainable footprint. So yeah, that's good to hear.
No, exactly, and they spread globally, right? And then if we move, because yes, those are big global ones, and of course it can sound daunting, right? And I'm sure you're thinking that these took millions for them to be able to do. What is actually being done closer to home? I'll still start with some of the big ones being done closer to home, just because I think we often don't realize how much is being done. So I think firstly, we need to take a step back and realize that the African continent generates an astounding 125 million tons of municipal solid waste annually. Wow. And this year, that's projected to rise to over 244 million tons. So municipal solid waste is a genuine concern for the continent. I think we can probably all agree that plastic waste is a big concern. And this is driven by, obviously, we've got rapid urbanization, we've got considerable population growth, and this has transformed waste into what we'd say is quite a visible crisis. But there are multiple areas or countries and initiatives where they've actually now recognized that this presents as an opportunity, which I think goes back to what we were saying earlier, right? there's climate risk, but equally then how can we then make the most of the situation, not from a sort of mercenary perspective, but in terms of this is where we are, how do we solve the problem, but do it from a perspective of equally, we can commercialize it. So there are various community, government and business initiatives that are tapping into waste as an untapped resource. So there's a conversion of organic waste into biogas.
Yeah.
So there is a rather large project in Kenya where that has been happening, and they're using small-scale biodigesters, household schools, and so on to convert that organic waste into clean methane gas, which also means less reliance on firewood and charcoal for cooking, which comes with the additional health benefits, but also reduced deforestation, or at least the reduced requirements for deforestation, which is great. I do know there are some small-scale projects working on that here in Zambia, in terms of converting waste into biogas. Malawi also have a similar initiative, and they're using it to power kitchens and prisons, therefore reducing the environmental footprint of the prison, but also improving the inmates' living conditions. So this, biogas is an amazing example of transforming waste into energy and enabling development. The other one that I found absolutely amazing when I read about, and it is being done around the world, but Kigali is known to be the cleanest city in the world.
Yeah.
So one of the things that has been happening in Rwanda, and you've got entities that do it, but also then obviously it's been scaled up, is using recycling plastic to make paving slabs. Your pavements you have outside, as well as for the roads. So a lot of their roads in Kigali that are these bright, shiny, amazing roads are, it seems, actually made from recycled plastic, which makes them durable, they're cost effective, and it's just a genius way to address a plastic waste problem, right? You're not then finding some other use and dumping it in a landfill or whatever it is. You're actually putting it towards something that, if you think about it here, it's infrastructure development, because that's what roads are, which then gives even more economic development opportunities because people now have roads. And so these are some great things happening. Ghana has a similar project where they make interlocking bricks from recycled plastic. They're cheaper, they're more weather resistant than traditional materials, and they tackle both the housing and the waste challenges being faced. But I don't want to seem like we're not cognizant of all the different things that are happening here in Zambia, right? We've got some amazing initiatives. I've said, obviously, there is the biogas. Yeah. There are some projects looking at biogas. I do think there are a couple of, or at least one entity that is looking at making paving slabs from recycled plastics. As you've spoken about, there are initiatives of recycling fabric that has been discarded in order to produce reusable menstrual pads. And some, so just to show some of these are small scale at the moment. That doesn't mean they can't become much larger and scale up. And that's essentially what we hope you'll be able to see the opportunities for coming out of this masterclass. Any of these, the biogas river would have started really small. And, it's a small idea and small concept, but you are then able to scale it. So I really do hope that these examples help highlight the various opportunities to integrate sustainability business or to have a sustainable product. But another key element here, and we touched on it in terms of financing opportunities, with all of these initiatives, your financing opportunities then increase immensely. And it's because, yes, you have responsible investors who will only invest in projects or undertakings that have a sustainability impact. But the way that this financing will be tapped into, I think, is also where can be some key differences to what is more traditional finance. So of course banks are still available. Banjin, obviously you've got the Women in Business, and we do have propositions, and we do have sort of green offer support for green initiatives as well. But if you're just starting out in your garage, maybe that's not quite the appropriate one for you, or maybe you need financing that comes with additional support in terms of how you're actually doing this greening and sustainability. So I just wanted to go through, as I said, yes, you've got traditional banks, Absa is definitely one, but there are also so many different grants that are available, and they can really help with getting you started. and that initial first set of scaling. You can also, there's a lot of opportunities for exploring hybrid financing. So it would be a grant plus the bank. And then also some would be partnerships, particularly with research entities. So there would be an element of financial support, but with a research component that obviously could give you as a business owner then further insight into the industry you're in, the product you're offering, and how it's being received. So just as a quick thing, you've got, in terms of African sustainability grants available this year, there's, for example, the EEP, the Seeds of Sustainability, there's the AU-EU Collaborative Research and Innovation Projects, Youth for Climate Grants, Grants for Africa, Climate Justice, Impact Fund for Africa. Those are all grants that should be explored and tapped into. But I think, as I said, it's then finding the one that best suits you. And as your business scales is where you would then ideally be transitioning to exploring your more traditional financing options. And this is where I think we're coming in to say, look, you start from one point and you scale up and you grow. You need to take it step by step, but have that longer term goal about where you want to be. And that goes back to my governance comment at the beginning. And I think we'll probably tap into some of the HR financial masterclasses that have already been held. You have a starting point, you have an end goal, but you need to make sure as you take the steps along the way that you are growing towards that, and taking the right steps to be building towards it.
I think so maybe, Sarah, before we go into the next slide, I'm cognizant that Maimbolo has had her hand. So Maimbolo, we do see your hand. Maimbolo Amoto. We will be getting to our Q&A. So as we get to the Q&A, please just keep your question at hand. If you have questions or any sentiments as Sarah is speaking, please just take note, and then as we are coming to our Q&A bit of the session, you can then pose your questions, but I'll be able to guide. But I think also important, I think a number of people would have probably been scrambling trying to get the names of the organizations that are providing grants. So what we'll do is, I think in the chat, we'll just drop them, we'll type them down. So please don't try to figure it all out. We're here to just make sure that we provide the right level of support. So I just thought it's important that we acknowledge Maimbolo's hand, and then also just give an indication that we will type in the chat the names of the organizations that are providing grants. But I'll hand back to you.
Thank you. Yes, definitely we can give that information, and I'm sure, again, there are so many others out there. So as we go through this, and I think I touched on it at the end in terms of just shifting your focus to looking at alternative options as opposed to a lot of those, traditional ones that we think of. I'm still going to be going through examples of sustainability and SMEs in the sustainability space, but I figured we need a bit of a change of what we're looking at here. And again, to reiterate that it's a relationship between long-term success and sustainability. I don't think anyone says, I'm starting a business and I really hope I fail in the first 5 years. Or, I'm taking over as manager of this entity that's been operating for 15 years. Let's pray I don't make it to 25. The whole goal, when you've got a business, is you want the longevity, you want success. And as we're seeing that the interplay between the long-term success and sustainability initiatives, that's, I think, really where, as this quote says, that's very heartening. But for me, I just think that's where you have that sort of golden moment, almost like that epiphany, right? That then says, okay, this is what's going to make it work and make us last. So I wanted to just give a couple more examples of sustainable solutions and innovations to demonstrate how it embraces or leads to long-term success. So, we've spoken about plastic materials. There was another company where they reduced the amount of plastic in their bottles. As a result, this reduced the cost of producing the bottles because they were paying for less plastic per bottle. So they then were able to obviously reduce costs. Still, I think they still sold the bottle around the same price. So essentially increased their profit margin, but were now also sustainable.
Good afternoon,
so it goes back to they were then able to access funding and financing that would not have otherwise been available. but found themselves in a position where they had reduced their input costs, which is obviously a great benefit. And this is now really common practice throughout the beverage company and other sectors, in terms of trying to be more efficient in the use of plastic in the packaging. And another really interesting example that I came across as I was researching for this masterclass it's this company that was started in 2001 by a first-year college student, and he started producing organic fertilizer from worm poop. Right? So again, I don't imagine that cost him very much to go source. But so started producing this organic fertilizer from worm poop, and he started off packaging it in used soda or softy bottles, right? Which, if you think about it, most of us probably end up paying someone to take those away, right? So he was sourcing his packaging for free. All he had to do was clean it and then fill it with worm poop, and boom, there is his product that he is now selling. But what I find so interesting with the story, aside from the fact of obviously it's quite genius, right? Having packaging that you get for free is very, very smart. But is that even as he scaled and grew his business, he didn't then move away from saying, to move to say, no, I'm now going to have some fancy packaging for my organic worm poop. He actually has scaled up his collection of old bottles. So he continues to offer the product in recycled softy bottles. But what he now does is they set up collection bins at schools, at different companies, various facilities. In some instances, they also sort of pay the schools a slight amount for the bottles they're collecting. But I think it's such an interesting way. If he's now basically he's developed a value chain for plastic bottles. And all he then does is has to clean and reuse them, as opposed to breaking them down to recycle them. And I think this is such an interesting one for us to maybe pause on, because if we take another example, right, of maybe you make jam at home, right, and you may use old glass jars that you boil to clean, and then you do it and you have your homemade jam and you probably give it to some friends or family and so on. Let's say you start to turn this into a little bit of a business. If you then were to scale up, you often find that people then move away from reusing those glass jars to saying, no, I now want my own fancy packaging. And they have to look a particular way because I'm no longer doing this as this little thing in my kitchen. It's now a legitimate business. But recognizing that actually, even as a legitimate business, using recycled items, obviously provided they are cleaned and meet the health and sanitary requirements, but using those actually still gives you a different twist on your business. Because you then would be recycling. It gives you that cost benefit of you're not paying for packaging, you're not paying for glass jars, because you can generally, I'm sure you set up collection points or whatever it may be and source them. And I think for me, this is where it becomes very interesting to look at how things that I guess I put it this way, things our mothers and our grandmothers and our great-grandmothers did now are coming up as these trendy, fashionable, sustainable options for us. Banji, you and I were having a conversation earlier about like nappies, right? I remember when I had my kids and decided to use cloth diapers. And yes, they're like fancier ones, with poppers, and you can buy the ones with the cool prints on. But yeah, some people looked at me like I was absolutely mad. Why would you do this? For me, it was twofold. One, yes, environmentally. I mean, think how many nappies you go through with a child. And if you're using regular ones, then you're dumping them in the bin, and where do they go? What happens to them? But also was the cost perspective. So I went and bought these fancy bougie cloth diapers, but I still did the maths and realized that 6 months of regular nappies covered the cost of these cloth ones, my bougie cloth ones. I use them on both my kids, so I got 2 to 3 years worth out, which means I definitely recovered my money from that. In fact, again, arguably saved money. And I then donated them afterwards. I gave them, passed them on because they were still fine. Usable, yeah. But when we were talking about it, it's just our mothers, our grandmothers, they didn't have fancy nappies with little plastic bits that flip out and whatever. You use cloth diapers, right? So there's so many things that also we've moved away from in terms of, because we've modernized. But if you now look back at it, they are sustainable. They are more cost efficient, and in some instances are also just with your health. So the entire, positioning of it is then something that you as a business, I think this is really where you need to look at it. Look at what the alternatives are to how things are currently done. Is there a way that it was being done in the past that would be more sustainable, that has a better impact on society or a better impact on the environment? Is there a cost benefit that comes out of that? And then comes to, I'm sure you'll be having a masterclass on some marketing or branding at some point, right? Comes to then how do you sell that story? And by story, I don't mean a made up fabrication, but a genuine story, right? I remember being given a scarf once by a friend, and it came with a lovely note by the Ethiopian lady who had made it, where she said, by you buying this scarf, you have helped me buy XYZ for my family. Scarf. But that adds an additional element to it that means when you are now trying to sell your product, you have more to add to it that would make me more inclined to engage, which is where just, as I said, this is really my key point for everyone today. So coming back to it, all of these examples I've given were not charities. None of them were NGOs. The examples I've given now are commercially active and viable businesses. They are making money, but doing so in a way that is sustainable, or doing so by integrating sustainability and ESG into their operations. So just to come back to this slide here to say, sustainability has to make business sense. You cannot, you can try, but I don't think it's going to last very long, and I don't think it's going to have a positive impact on your business to be running it as a thing on the side. It has to be part of whatever your process is. Now, even if you, again, I know some people say, but I work in an office, right? My business is, let's say, consultancy. How am I going to be sustainable? Again, where does your waste go? Could you work with one of these companies who are collecting plastics and producing outdoor furniture here in Lusaka? Could you have them come and collect your rubbish? So, and potentially then look at, is it you hand it over for free? Or at least you're not paying someone else to take your rubbish. Could you implement different changes in your process that mean you print less paper? Change your light bulbs. Eventually have the company car, if it's only used, have the company car shift from, like I said earlier, a diesel to an electric or whatever it may be. There's literally something that every single one of us and every kind of business really could do. But you need to think of it from the sense of it making business sense. And I think when we shift our mindset to realizing that that's truly what sustainability is, we'll stop seeing it as this big, scary barrier and see that it actually is just this amazing, field of opportunity, right? There are so many different ways that you can be sustainable and you can integrate it in your business. So then how do you actually do it, right? And obviously for each business, it is going to be different. So I've tried to keep this a bit more generic so that anybody can try and, to implement this. But I would say there's the key steps on your journey to integrating sustainability, as with anything. And another way of thinking about sustainability is, digital. Digital is very often actually an enabler for sustainability, particularly when you're looking at financial inclusion. But if you look at it from the perspective of, when computers came out, everybody was terrified, right? No, we don't need computers, and this, that, we don't need them. But then it's become something that computers and digital now encompass our entire business, right? From HR to finance to your logistics to whatever. You've got to look at sustainability the same way, that it is something that's just going to infiltrate every aspect of our lives and business. So how do we, to start off with, you need to know where you are. You cannot say, I'm going to become more sustainable or I'm going to become sustainable if you don't know where you currently are. So it's this sort of initial baseline assessment and impact that needs to be undertaken. And as you do that, also look at what are the opportunities for you to have an impact, environmental or social, alongside where are you impacted as a business by environmental and social factors. So then it gives you a bit of a map as to where you're going to focus your efforts and therefore the base that you'll be able to grow from. Next is, there's the old adage, right? If it doesn't get measured, it won't get done. So you need to set yourself a goal. It can be a big, scary goal or it can be a small goal, but you need to set yourself a goal and you need to have targets, and then you need to monitor how you're doing. So ideally set yourself something measurable and achievable. But even if it's a big, scary goal, it can't be totally unrealistic. But set yourself a goal or objective, So I've given examples here. If you want to reduce costs by 10% in the next 12 months through energy efficiency, that is my goal. And then I will undertake different things to get to that goal. If I want an improvement of 5% improvement in diversity in my workforce, then that is my goal, and I will then be deliberate as I go through my hiring options, for example. So set those goals and targets, measure your progress, and track how you're doing, and be honest with yourself. The final one is you need to engage stakeholders, you need to continue learning and finding opportunities. So, at this point, you'd have done your initial assessment and you've got your baseline, you've set your goals and targets, and you're on your way, but you need to engage different stakeholders. As I said, here in Zambia, we've got at a governmental level, you have the Ministry of Green Economy, there are various other, entities from NGOs to, multinationals who are playing in this space. Engage with those stakeholders, continue learning through masterclasses such as this and others, but also learning from those stakeholders that you would now be engaging with and meeting with, building your network, and through that you'll find where the opportunities are. But you'll also then be able to see what the efforts that you've set as your goals and targets, where they're actually going to have an impact. You need to be watching what impact are they having. But the big thing here is also taking on the feedback of how your efforts are being perceived and received by the market. You're a business at the end of the day. That will allow you to look at how you're doing it, if you need to course correct to do so, but equally allows you to see the opportunities that are available to you. And I think also as you're engaging with these different stakeholders, you're finding out about the different opportunities is where those new and alternative sources of financing, as well as then building, for example, on your governance side, getting the necessary support there to then be able to explore the different financing and funding options that will enable you to further scale up your business, are really where they'll come in. So yeah, just continue to engage, continue to monitor and track, and ultimately the end goal is to improve your bottom line through these sustainable initiatives. So I guess my final reminders are that start small and scale gradually. I know we gave the example of, I mentioned the large shoe company who uses recycled ocean waste to make trainers. They didn't start that wasn't their business model from day one. So start small, start where you are and see what are the small tweaks and amendments and adjustments that I can undertake, business can undertake for us to see benefits here. But I do want to caveat this to say, you don't be scared of dreaming big. You can have that big scary goal and say, I want to get to the point where this is what I'm going to do. Differentiate your offerings, and this is general business advice, right? Where, like I said, with the 2 cups of coffee, they're two Americanos, really. But what's going to make yours stand out? And if sustainability is the thing that can make it stand out, that also gives you other business benefits, then do it. But make sure your customers also know about this differentiation in the offering. Network, learn, and engage. Again, I think this is just sound business advice in general, but particularly in sustainability, where I said there's also so much scope for partnership with researchers and NGOs. There are a lot of opportunities there. And yes, the key takeaway really is integrate sustainability. Don't treat it as an add-on or something you do on the side of your desk. It's got to be integrated into your business strategy for it to really give you maximum benefits. And then thereafter is really explore the alternative financing options. There are a range of them available, so we will share from the grants. Obviously, there's, Banji is also always available for guidance and tips. But just, I guess it's be open-minded to the opportunities that are available. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Sarah. I think, we've definitely learned a lot. Happy that I think we can now get to a point where we actually distinguish between ESG and sustainability. I think for me, there are key 4 points before we get into the Q&A. The first one is, regardless of the stage of your business, there's an opportunity to integrate sustainable practices. And I think that was really the last point that, you sort of brought in. So let's just think that regardless, that big, scary goal, don't think because I'm startup, I won't be able to get to, embed or integrate sustainable practices until I get to a certain level. So it has to be part, of your everyday operation. So start thinking about that. I love the quote where you said, sustainability will only work if it makes business sense. So let's start thinking of what are those practices, that actually start to make business sense, that start to go back into contributing to the bottom line. So we have to make sure about that. I think for me as well, it was that sustainability is not a buzzword. It is a buzzword, but we shouldn't take it as a buzzword because it's been with us for forever. So I think for me, when you were talking about, using the same, jar if you're making jam, and I couldn't help but remember some of the practices our grandmothers had. So if you're thinking about, visiting your grandma and how they used to reuse the same containers. So you'd actually go to visit and, it's time to have tea, and then you find this, the tub or what should be margarine in there. But it's not margarine, and she's putting her needles and her buttons and all that. So, I think the practices have been there, since time immemorial. Or you open the fridge and what you think, again, might be margarine is actually beans in the jar. So, there've been a lot of practices that I think if we go back and think about, have already been there, but because of trying to make everything modern, we've actually forgotten. So I thought, that was a light moment for me when I was trying to think of the many times I couldn't understand why, but I sort of get it. So maybe before we get into the questions, I do know that my Bolo had a question for us. I just wanted to get into the comments. So we had a comment from Evans, and I think this is the point when you were talking about using the eggshells. So Evans says, now I understand why my wife throws them in the garden. So again, please, those eggshells, I think if we all come in as a collective and are able to use them, we'll actually be making a contribution.
Coffee as well.
Yeah, coffee.
Ground coffee is can also be very good. Not scrub, but also is good in the garden.
Yeah, I know it for a scrub, but in the garden as well. There you have it. And then Grace says, thank you so much for the knowledge shared. Maybe my Bolo at this point, I know you've asked the question whether the presentation will be shared with you. We will have the recording on our YouTube channel. I did indicate earlier. So in case you want to access this particular recording, and even the recordings that we previously had, like financial management, HR management, which you can see actually become a common thread towards sustainability. And it was good that HR management is actually the middle child, like you called it, the social piece that, more often than not, you tend to forget about. So we have all those on the YouTube channel, and this will also be uploaded. So please just look out, for Absa Bank Zambia, and you will be able to access, the previous sessions. But at this point, maybe my Bolo or anybody else, if you have a question, please, you can raise your hand and then you can just unmute, ask your question, and then Sarah will be able to take it. Or if not, you can drop the message in the chat and I'll be able to read it out for you. So LV says, merci beaucoup, Sarah, for sharing your insights. So
Oh, I can't see who LV is. I need to.
Yeah, so there you have it. So we do have some comments coming through. Like I said, if you do have any questions, please, you can get in, raise your hand, or just simply unmute your mic and then pose your question. Or like we have seen, others are dropping their comments in the chat. So yeah. So maybe whilst we're waiting, Sarah, I think for me, another key point that came out is, I think it's a question that we have to ask ourselves. And this is really for all of us. So whether at individual or at business level, but particularly at business level, what are the opportunities that are around us? So when you look at the waste, do we just pass it by and are thinking it's waste? Or how many times are we actually having people come and collect the waste? And you could actually be sitting on a big business opportunity. So I think, for example, the plastic papers, we do have a young gentleman who I know who's actually already started that. So in Zambia, he's already doing that, and trying to see how he can work with the local councils around that. When you look at the biogas, we also do have a lady who, her line of business was actually trying to get urea from the rabbits, as waste, and then putting that as part of into fertilizer. So, and I think a lot of people have these ideas and they're trying to work on them. But sometimes it's just the funding aspect. And I think it's great that we've touched on that. And we can always try to see how do we have a more blended approach. Whether you're looking for a grant, don't wait until you get the full grant. Come and have a conversation with us. We do have our Women in Business team available, and we'll be able to post in the chat our email address. You can drop us an email there. But yeah, I think for me, it's just the opportunities and maybe just to get a sense from you, anything else that you would like to highlight as we are coming to the close. I do take note that I think from a question and comment point, we sort of have exhausted what has come through. But if you have any additional comments or questions that you'd like us to pass on to Sarah, we'll be able to just get that through our email address, which is being put into the chat right now. So it's womeninbusiness@absa.africa. So womeninbusiness@absa.africa. So maybe, Sarah, as we're waiting to get more input, we can just get your last words.
Yes. Thanks so much. And thank you, actually, all of you for joining in. And thank you, Banji, for having me today. As you know, I do get very passionate when I start talking about sustainability. But because, I think to your point there, but there are just so many opportunities. Waste is such an obvious, easy one, right? But like I spoke to energy efficiency. None of us enjoy having to pay big electricity bills. Obviously here we've still got load shedding, so maybe it's a bit different, but then we still have power, right?
Yeah.
So how do we look at being more energy efficient as individuals and as businesses? It's just, to me, finding those opportunities. It's from the waste, and you've got the biogas, you've got, the rabbit one is quite an incredible story as well. But it'd be things like, and again, I think we find ourselves so focused often on the environmental side. But if I was to open a cleaning agency tomorrow, odds are I'm going to have mainly women working for me. But as I have those women working for me, am I assisting them to achieve some level of financial independence? And therefore move towards being more financially included in the economy? Odds are I would be. But then comes to, how am I tracking and monitoring that to then make the most of the opportunities that are available to me? I think I met somebody who had started, there was a business where they were making gin from the marula trees. One, the benefit of that obviously was, and they had predominantly women working for them. So it was assisting from that perspective of, again, financial independence and some of the other social ills that we know exist when times are hard. Assisting in that regard, but equally, it seems, if I remember correctly, the marula tree is much harder to burn and turn into firewood or charcoal. So by using those and filling up the area with marula trees, you're also reducing the amount of deforestation. So there was the environmental and the social benefit coming from it, and then you're producing a product that you can then sell and make money from. So it's just really thinking outside of the box for those opportunities, and you said looking and realizing that there are just things around us all over the place that could be changed. And some of Google is our friend in this case, right? Google is happening. I don't think I'll ever forget that story with that Nepalese kid who managed to basically harness solar power through strands of hair. And he's a kid and it's part of a science project. The worm poop example I gave, was a college student still. So there are opportunities all over the place. You just then, as you said, need to see how you look at the financing side for you to actually be able to get it off the ground. But I think, as you said, by sharing your email address, obviously people will be able to reach out and engage, and you will then, be able to then give some guidance and support to customers in this space, because you can have the best idea ever, but you do need some money to get it off the ground.
That's true.
But I do hope that if we have a conversation again in a couple of months, you'll have some even more exciting examples of new projects and ideas that people are undertaking.
Okay. So thank you, Sarah. I think the last comment is coming from Nyembezi. Nyembezi says, thank you, Sarah, for the great business insights and Absa team. She had to jump off to get into another meeting. So thank you, Nyembezi, for that. Grace has come back asking for the funding opportunity contact. So Grace, we will be able to drop the list in the chat post this. We just want to kindly ask that you will have to do research on those organizations. Do your own research, check as much as possible. So I think at this point we'll be coming to the end of today's session. We will be having Our next masterclass next month, we'll be looking at business law. So please make sure that you join in to next month's masterclass. Look out for the communication. But once again, if you want to access the previous masterclasses, including this one, which will be uploaded, please just go to our YouTube channel, search for Absa Bank Zambia, and you will be able to get all the information that you need on the previous masterclasses. But for today, I think it's just to say thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sarah, for today. Thank you for the insights shared. I think we all walk away getting a better idea of what sustainability is, where exactly are we sitting within our business journey, and what else can we do? And more importantly, what are the opportunities? So looking forward to hosting you next month. Thank you.
Thank you.